Arrival of the alien warrior. The Galactic Council chamber was silent as the towering warrior known as Karath stepped forward. His body gleaming with the armor of his people, his name alone carried weight across a dozen star systems, and his victories were sung in the great halls of warriors. Among his kind he was called the Unbroken, for no battle had ever forced him to his knees. Yet today, he was chosen for a task unlike any he had ever faced. The council had grown weary of hearing whispers about the humans, these strange creatures from Earth who were still young in the stars, yet whose soldiers were already being called the hardest in the galaxy. Their marine boot camp was said to be the most brutal training known anywhere, and rumors spread that even Deathworlders would not last a week within it. The council did not believe such stories, but the whispers had spread too far, so they decided to end the debate once and for all. They sent Karath. The warrior accepted with pride. He believed it would be easy. He imagined himself towering over fragile humans, watching their fragile bodies break. While he endured effortlessly, he saw it as an honor to prove his people's superiority. The council declared before all that if even Karath failed, then humanity's reputation must be acknowledged. When he stepped aboard the human transport ship bound for Earth, he stood in the hangar among human recruits, his eyes scanning them with disdain. They were smaller, their skin soft, their voices loud and unrefined. He thought they were more like prey animals than warriors, yet he was surprised that none of them looked afraid of him. Instead, they looked at him with amusement, some even laughing as though it was normal to see an alien giant standing in line beside them. When they arrived at the marine training grounds, the air was thick with heat, and the sun burned down with unforgiving fire. Karath felt the weight. Immediately the humans marched in straight lines with precision, their boots pounding into the dirt. Their drill instructors barked orders with voices that carried like thunder. These men were not afraid of anyone, not even him. Karath waited for a sign of weakness from them, but saw none. He did not know it yet, but the first seeds of doubt were already planted inside him. The first day was chaos. Every recruit was thrown into action immediately. They ran for miles with heavy packs. They dove into mud, crawling beneath wire. They carried each other through obstacle courses Karath had trained in battle his entire life. Yet this was different. This was not combat. This was punishment without end, and there was no victory to seize, only survival. The human instructors shouted at him just as they shouted at the others. They did not bow to his size or his name when he tried to explain his rank and his victories. They ignored him. They cared nothing for titles here. As hours turned to days, Karath began to notice strange things. The humans complained loudly yet kept moving. They cursed their instructors yet obeyed without hesitation when their bodies trembled with exhaustion. They laughed at one another, urging each other to keep going. One night, after a punishing run through mud, he watched humans collapse side by side in the dirt, and instead of despair, they grinned as if the suffering was a shared victory. This baffled him. On his world, weakness was shame, but here, weakness was endured together. The hardest blow to his pride came during hand-to-hand drills when a human no taller than his chest stood against him. Karath thought it would be over in seconds, but the human fought with a stubborn fire. Every time Karath threw him down, he rose again, his body bruised, but his eyes unbroken. At last the instructors called the fight, and Karath realized with shock that though he had not been beaten, he had not truly won. Either he had never met such persistence before. That night, as the alien lay staring up at the dark Earth sky, he felt confusion inside him. He had believed this trial would prove human weakness. Instead, he saw something far more dangerous than strength. He saw willpower that did not die. He saw endurance that mocked pain. He saw laughter. In suffering, Karath was the strongest warrior of his people. Yet even on the first week of boot camp, he began to wonder whether he was strong enough to stand among humans for the first time in his long life. Karath the Unbroken felt doubt. First breakdown. Karath woke before the sun as the blaring horn echoed across the camp. His body ached from the punishment of the previous day, yet there was no time for rest. The drill instructors stormed through the barracks, yelling at every recruit to rise and fall into formation. The humans moved with speed, pulling on boots and uniforms as if their bodies were machines. Karath struggled to keep pace. His frame, built for combat, was powerful, but he was not used to endless running. Lifting, crawling, and carrying without pause as the morning began, they were already running across the field with full packs heavy on their backs. The alien warrior had thought strength would carry him through, but the packs felt heavier than expected, not because of the weight itself, but because the humans moved fast, never slowing down their pace while he lumbered behind. The sun grew hotter, the air thicker with sweat and dust. Karoth felt his chest tighten, yet the humans did not break, heard them laughing. Even as their bodies dripped with exhaustion, one recruit shouted encouragement to another who stumbled, and the entire line cheered until the man found his stride again. This spirit of unity confused Karoth, for among his people weakness was met with scorn, yet here it was met with strength drawn from others. Hours later, the instructors threw them into the mud, crawling under barbed wire while machine fire cracked above their heads. Karoth had faced real battlefields, but this was different. There was no glory, no victory, no enemy to slay, only the ground ripping into his arms and legs as he dragged his massive body forward. The mud clung to his armor like skin, sucking him down while the humans beside him moved. With stubborn rhythm, he growled in frustration, his pride burning as smaller, weaker beings pulled ahead of him. When they finally reached the end, Karoth collapsed to his knees, his muscles trembling with fatigue. The humans stumbled as well, but they slapped each other on the shoulders. They grinned through mud-stained faces. They shouted jokes at one another as if the pain meant nothing. Karoth could not understand this. He had always fought for honor, for glory, for the song of his name. Yet these humans seemed to fight simply to endure together. That evening came the endurance run, one of the most dreaded tests, a relentless march across rocky terrain with little water or rest. The instructors gave them only a few minutes before, sending them out again. Karoth tried to summon his warrior pride to fuel his strength, but as the miles stretched onward, his legs began to feel like stone. His breath came ragged. His chest burned like fire. He stumbled once, then again, and finally, he crashed to the ground, the dirt biting into his face. For the first time in his life, Karoth could not rise. He heard laughter from some recruits who had doubted him. They whispered that the alien giant was not as strong as he appeared. The instructors loomed over him, their voices cold. They told him that no one cared who he was or where he came from. If he could not stand, he was nothing here. Karoth clenched his fists, rage boiling inside. But when he pushed himself upward, his body betrayed him. His limbs shook and he fell once more. It was then that a human recruit stopped beside him against orders. The man bent down and grabbed Karoth by the arm, pulling him up with all the strength his smaller frame could muster. He shouted at him to keep moving, told him that no one was left behind here together. They staggered forward step after step, and soon others joined, circling around the alien, until the group carried itself forward like a single beast. Karoth could not believe it. Instead of mocking his weakness, they shared their strength with him, and by doing so, they pushed him through the fire. By the time they reached the end, Karoth was shaking. His pride shattered. Yet in the midst of shame, he felt something else stirring. Inside him, a strange respect for these humans who endured without end, who lifted not only themselves but each other when they fell. His mind wrestled with confusion. He was the strongest warrior of his species, yet here among humans he had broken, in only days, and still they did not abandon him. That night, as Karoth lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, he remembered the faces of those who had pulled him up and refused to let him fail. He felt a weight in his chest heavier than any pack or weapon. It was the realization that these creatures who seemed weak were in truth stronger than he had ever imagined, and the first cracks in his pride widened into something deeper. Karoth, the unbroken, had been broken. And yet somehow he was, still standing not by his own strength but by theirs, brotherhood in pain. The next week of training began with the same endless routine of exhaustion and pain. The recruits were pushed from dawn until nightfall, with no moment of comfort. Karoth felt his body growing weaker each day. Though his pride tried to push him onward, he realized that strength alone was not enough here. The humans endured not because their bodies were tougher, but because they carried one another through every challenge. They were bound together by something invisible that he could not yet define. During a punishing march through swamps, the alien's heavy steps dragged in the thick water. His legs felt as if chains pulled him down. Every step was harder than the last. The recruits trudged forward with rifles raised above their heads while the instructors shouted at them from the banks of the swamp. Karath had never felt so humiliated. His armor-like skin was covered in leeches, and his shoulders ached under the weight of his pack. As he slowed, he thought surely this was where he would collapse again. But, before he could stumble, a human recruit pressed forward beside him and offered support. It was a young Marine named Carter. His face smeared with mud, his eyes blazing with determination, though his body looked far weaker than Karath's. He kept moving without hesitation when Karath muttered that he did not need help. The human only laughed and said no one makes it alone in the Corps. The words stuck in the alien's mind like a blade lodged in stone, for his people believed that the weak should be left behind. Yet these humans believed the opposite. Later that night after the swamp drill, the recruits gathered around a fire to dry their gear. Their bodies battered, but their spirits strangely alive. Karath sat apart at first, still wrestling with the confusion in his mind. Then Carter and a few others called him over without hesitation, as though he had always been part of them. They shared their rations, joked about the instructors, and laughed about the misery of the day. Karath did not laugh at first, but he listened, and slowly, a strange warmth grew within him. He realized that in this place pain was not endured alone. It was carried together until it became almost bearable. The days that followed only deepened this lesson on the obstacle courses. When Karath faltered, human hands reached to pull him upward during combat drills. When he failed to adapt to human technique, they showed him moves patiently, instead of mocking him during long runs when he thought his chest would burst. They shouted for him to keep going, urging him forward as if his success mattered to them as much as their own. Karath began to understand that here survival was not only about personal strength, it was about the bond between those who shared the suffering. One morning during a live fire exercise, Karath found himself crawling beside Carter through the dirt explosions, shaking the ground. The alien felt fear rising inside him, though he had faced real war. Before, this was different because here failure meant letting down the one beside him. When Carter slipped, Karath reached out without thinking and pulled him forward, and in that moment he realized something had shifted inside him. He was no longer only enduring training for his own pride. He was enduring it for those who marched beside him. The instructors noticed the change. The alien who once carried himself with arrogance now pushed others forward, shouting for them to rise when they fell. He began to understand the strange fire that burned inside humans. It was not only strength or endurance, it was something deeper. It was the refusal to let anyone break alone, and it was that fire that carried them through pain. One night, as Karath lay in his bunk listening to the snores of exhausted recruits, he thought of the great battles he had fought across the stars. He thought of the enemies he had crushed and the victories he had won. Yet none of those memories felt as powerful as the simple act of being pulled to his feet by a human smaller than himself. He realized that this was a different kind of war. A war against weakness, against despair. And it was a war the humans were born to fight. By the end of that week, Karath no longer stood apart. He marched shoulder to shoulder with the recruits. He carried their weight when they faltered, and they carried his. When he did, he no longer saw himself as their superior, but as their equal in suffering, and in that equality, he found something he had never known before, a brotherhood forged not by blood or species but by pain endured together. Karath the Unbroken began to understand why humans were feared, not because they were the strongest, but because they were unyielding together, and he felt for the first time that he was beginning to change, breaking the warrior's ego. The sun rose over the training field as the recruits stood in formation, their faces hardened with fatigue, yet their eyes sharp. The instructors wasted no time that morning. They ordered the recruits into combat drills hand to hand, sparring under the watchful gaze of the entire unit. Karath stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the dirt floor. He had fought in wars across half the galaxy and had never been defeated. He thought this would finally be the moment he could prove his superiority to the humans. His first opponent was a lean Marine with a scar across his jaw. The human looked fragile compared to him, but the instructors barked for the fight to begin. The Marine lunged forward with surprising speed, landing strikes against Karath's chest and legs. Karath laughed at first, knocking the human back with ease, but the man rose again, his face calm and his eyes focused. He attacked again and again. No matter how many times Karath threw him down, He returned to his feet with stubborn determination. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, until finally the instructors called an end to the match. Karath had not been defeated, but neither had he truly won. He realized then that victory here was not measured in domination but in endurance. The next fight paired him against a smaller woman, her arms thin yet her stance unshakable. Karath underestimated her strength, but within seconds he was forced onto the defensive. Her strikes were precise, her movements sharp. She fought with a discipline that he could not match, though his power overwhelmed her. She refused to yield even when, thrown into the dirt, she rolled back onto her feet. Her jaw clenched, her eyes defiant when the fight ended. She saluted him with a grin before limping back to formation. Karath stood stunned, his pride wounded in a way that no blade had ever cut. As the days continued, the instructors intensified their trials. The recruits were forced into obstacle courses that stretched for miles through mud pits, walls of stone, and high ropes that tested every ounce of their will. Karath thought his strength would make these trials easier, but he soon discovered that the challenges were designed to break not the body but the spirit. Smaller humans scrambled over walls with teamwork, pulling one another upward, while Karath, who tried to climb alone, struggled until hands reached down to pull him up again and again. He was reminded that here no one succeeded without the strength of others. The breaking point came during a night exercise when the recruits were roused from their bunks with only seconds to prepare. They were marched into freezing rain, ordered to crawl through a trench while icy water poured down. Karath's body trembled. Though his species was built for harsh climates, the exhaustion from weeks of training had stripped him raw. Around him, the humans gritted their teeth, pushing forward without hesitation. Some sang songs through chattering teeth. Others shouted encouragement over the roar of the storm. Karath tried to summon his pride, but when his body slipped beneath the cold water, it was Carter who grabbed his arm, dragging him forward, yelling that no one would quit tonight. By dawn, Karath lay soaked and shaking on the ground. His pride shattered his body. Broken, yet he was still alive, only because others refused to let him fall. He realized then that his old way of thinking was gone. The ego that had carried him across countless victories was useless. Here these humans who looked so fragile were proving stronger than him, not in muscle or size but in spirit. Their refusal to surrender broke something inside him that had always stood unchallenged. In the quiet moments after the drill, Karath sat among the recruits. His head bowed. He listened as they spoke of home, of families waiting for them, of why they endured such pain. He realized that each of them carried not only themselves but the weight of others who believed in them. That was why they could laugh through misery. That was why they could rise after every fall. It was not pride but purpose, and it was stronger than anything he had ever known. From that day forward, Karath no longer saw himself as above them. He began to train with them, not against them. He pushed others. When they faltered, he learned to shout words of encouragement instead of relying on arrogance, and for the first time, he felt something his people had never taught him. Humility. The great warrior who had never known defeat was finally broken, not by battle, but by the spirit of humanity. And in that breaking, he found a new kind of strength. The test of fire. The recruits were told nothing in the days before the great test, only that it would be the harshest trial of their training, and that many would fail. The instructors called it the crucible and whispered that it was the moment when boys became Marines and when weakness was burned away. Karath listened in silence, his massive frame sitting among the humans in the mess hall. Though he had endured battles across the galaxy, he felt a knot in his chest. He had faced death before, but he had never faced anything like this. For here the enemy was not another warrior, but exhaustion itself. When the test began, the recruits were woken in the dead of night and marched out into the wilderness. Each man and woman carrying only a fraction of supplies, with heavy packs strapped to their backs and weapons clutched in their hands. The air was cold, the stars sharp in the sky. Karath marched at the front, his shoulders aching from the weight of his gear, but he said nothing around him. The humans whispered encouragements to one another, even as they shivered and stumbled. They moved as a single living thing, bound by the will to endure. The first day was endless, marching across jagged terrain, rocks cutting into their boots, blisters forming on their feet. The instructors gave them little food and less water every mile. Karoth expected someone to collapse, yet when one faltered, others grabbed their arms, dragging them forward. Carter limped badly with a swollen ankle, but he refused to slow. Karoth carried part of his pack without a word, feeling for the first time not shame but pride in helping another. As night fell, they built small fires and huddled together for warmth. Karoth looked into the flames and thought of his people who would never have lowered themselves to share burdens. He realized he no longer cared for the pride of his race, for here in the darkness among humans he had found something greater. The second day brought combat drills against mock enemies. The recruits moved through forests, ambushed by instructors firing blanks and explosions. Shaking the trees, Karoth used his massive strength to shield others pushing through branches and carrying heavy loads when the smaller recruits tired. He lifted them onto his shoulders, marching forward through the chaos his body burned with fatigue, but he refused to fall, for he knew that if he gave in, others would suffer with him, and he could no longer bear that thought. On the third night, the weather turned against them. Rain poured without mercy, soaking every uniform until they clung like chains to weary bodies. Mud swallowed their boots and the wind howled like a beast. Karoth felt his strength waning with every step, yet when he looked around, he saw the humans still pushing, still gritting their teeth, still laughing through. The storm. One recruit shouted a song into the night, and soon voices rose together, echoing defiance into the storm. Karoth joined them, his deep alien voice mixing with human voices until for a moment he forgot he was not one of them. He forgot he was anything other than a Marine. By the fourth day, hunger clawed at their stomachs, their rations long gone, their faces pale with exhaustion. Karoth's body, which had once seemed indestructible, shook with weakness. He stumbled to his knees more than once, but Carter and others pulled him up with fierce shouts, refusing to let him fall when another recruit collapsed. Karoth himself bent down, lifting the man onto his back, his massive frame carrying the weight while the others cheered and pushed onward. He had once believed strength was meant to elevate himself, but now he saw that true strength was meant to carry others. On the final day of the crucible, the recruits were marched to the top of a rocky hill. The climb tore at their legs and lungs, yet they moved step by step together. The instructors waited at the summit, their voices booming over the recruits as they declared the test complete. Karoth stood among the humans, his chest heaving, his armor-like skin torn with cuts and his body trembling. Yet inside him burned a fire stronger than any he had ever known. He had not only survived, he had endured with them and for them, and in that endurance, he had become something greater than the warrior he had once been. That night, as the recruits sat in silence around the dying fires, Karoth looked at Carter and the others, and for the first time he spoke words that surprised even himself. He told them that if this was what it meant to be human, then perhaps he was becoming one too. The recruits laughed and clapped him on the back, and in that moment Karoth felt a bond deeper than blood. He was no longer the unbroken warrior of his people. He was a brother forged in fire. The battle within. The dawn of the sixth day brought no rest for the recruits as the instructors marched them into a clearing that had been transformed into a battlefield. Karoth followed closely behind the humans, his muscles sore and his mind heavy with exhaustion. But there was no thought of stopping, no thought of retreat, only the unyielding drive to survive and to push others forward. The instructors had prepared a simulation of chaos unlike anything Karoth had experienced before. The ground littered with obstacles, fire bursting from hidden trenches and holographic enemies striking from every direction. The humans moved with precision and determination. Though their bodies trembled with fatigue, Karoth felt a thrill he had never known in battle before, for here, the enemy was controlled yet unpredictable, and the stakes were real, for pride, honor, and survival intertwined in a single moment. Karoth charged forward, lifting fallen logs and hurling them at the advancing dummies, protecting smaller recruits, and clearing paths as bullets zipped past him, narrowly missing his broad shoulders. The humans moved with surprising agility, dodging and weaving. Karoth had never seen strategy so simple yet effective. He marveled at the way they adapted to danger, as though danger itself were a teacher, and each movement a lesson in survival. He felt his own alien instincts sharpened by necessity, learning to move not just with brute force, but with coordination and timing as the humans had shown him. The battle raged on for hours, and exhaustion gnawed at K-Roth like a relentless predator. Yet he refused to stop every time he faltered. Someone's hand pulled him back. Whether Carter or a smaller recruit struggling under a heavy pack, the bonds forged in the crucible were stronger than any pain, and they pushed him onward. And in that moment, K-Roth realized that strength alone was meaningless if it did not serve others. Every strike he delivered, every obstacle he removed was done, not for glory, but for the humans who had become his comrades. During a particularly brutal segment of the simulation, an explosion knocked K-Roth off balance and sent him tumbling down a slope. He crashed into the mud and water, his massive body groaning under the weight of the fall, yet as he struggled to rise, he saw a human recruit pinned under debris without hesitation. K-Roth surged forward, lifting the rubble with superhuman strength and freeing the trapped recruit, his hands shaking from exhaustion. But his heart steady in its purpose, the recruit gasped and smiled, and K-Roth realized that he had never felt more alive for the first time. Survival was no longer about himself. It was about others, and the clarity of that truth burned brighter than any pain. As the sun reached its zenith, the instructors increased the intensity. More smoke, more fire, more relentless attacks. K-Roth's senses were on fire. He could hear every footstep, feel every vibration, and yet he moved with a rhythm that felt almost preternatural. His massive frame a shield for the weaker humans, and his strikes precise enough to eliminate threats without hesitation. He noticed that the humans around him were tiring, yet not giving in. They looked to him, and he looked to them, and together they became something greater than any individual. Each step, each motion, a symphony of survival that even the instructors could not break. Finally, as the day began to fade, the instructors signaled the end of the simulation. The recruits collapsed where they stood, some laughing, some crying, some simply breathing heavily. And K-Roth sat among them, his chest rising and falling like a mountain in the wind, his body battered and bruised, yet his spirit soaring, for he had passed not by strength alone, but by unity, by trust, and by the understanding that he was no longer alone in this strange and unforgiving world. He looked at Carter and the others, and he knew that when the war finally came, the humans would be unstoppable, for they had learned to fight not as individuals but as a living organism, and K-Roth had become one of them. That night, as they huddled intense under the starlit sky, K-Roth allowed himself a small smile. He had come to complete a training program and prove the might of his people. Yet in the end, he had found something far more powerful than physical strength. He had discovered a bond, a resilience, a human spirit that no alien warrior could ever match. And he whispered quietly to himself that perhaps he was not the strongest warrior in the galaxy anymore, but he was stronger than he had ever dreamed in ways he could never have imagined. The final trial. The 7th day arrived, and the camp was alive with tension. A storm of anticipation swept over the recruits, and K-Roth could feel it in the air. The instructors had promised that today would be the ultimate test, the culmination of everything they had endured from the first grueling day to the endless hours of drills and simulated battles, and K-Roth stood among the humans feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and unease, for he had come to respect their resilience and their tenacity, and he had learned that true strength was not measured in muscle alone, but in courage, in unity, and in the will to survive. The instructors led them to a vast terrain that stretched farther than the eye could see. Mountains rising in jagged peaks, forests dense with shadows, and valleys that seemed to hide every imaginable threat. The humans and K-Roth moved together across the terrain. Their steps synchronized their senses, heightened every sound and movement, analyzed every possibility considered, and yet the challenges ahead were more dangerous than anything they had faced before. Hidden traps, explosive devices, and alien drones that struck without warning created a labyrinth of peril that tested not just strength, but strategy and intuition. K-Roth charged ahead, breaking through barricades, and pulling fallen humans out of the line of fire, his massive arms clearing paths. And yet, even as he moved with unstoppable force, he realized that brute strength alone would not win this trial. He began to coordinate with the humans, signaling with gestures, pointing and guiding, helping the slower recruits navigate the obstacles, showing them how to anticipate the attacks and how to use the terrain to their advantage. The humans responded instantly, their eyes filled with trust, their movements precise and deadly in harmony with Karath's own instincts, and in that moment he understood fully why humanity survived against all odds. For they fought as one, thinking as one, and adapting faster than any alien could predict. The hours dragged. Unlike a relentless storm, and fatigue gnawed at every body, every mind. Yet no one wavered, no one surrendered. Every setback became a lesson. Every failure, a step toward mastery. Karath found himself in the center of a fierce engagement, a cliffside, where drones attacked from every angle and the humans were pinned. The odds seemed insurmountable, and yet he did not hesitate. He leapt into the fray, smashing drones with bone-crushing force, his hands moving with precision to disable traps and create openings for the humans to advance. He felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins and the rush of being part of something larger than himself, a force that transcended fear and pain. As the sun dipped low, casting fiery shadows across the battlefield, the instructors called for the final phase. The humans had to capture the enemy base, a fortress heavily defended and fortified with every imaginable hazard. Karath led the charge, his massive frame, a battering ram, his instincts honed. From years of alien combat, yet tempered now by what he had learned from humans, he moved with strategy, signaling paths, covering fire, protecting the weakest and striking with precision. When opportunity appeared, the humans followed his lead seamlessly, each step a testament to their training and their unbreakable spirit together. They fought not for recognition, not for glory, but for survival, and the bond that had been forged through sweat, pain, and relentless effort. Finally, they reached the central. Command Karath smashed the last obstacle, and the humans surged forward, neutralizing the remaining threats. The instructors watched in stunned silence, for never had a recruit completed the trial with such cohesion, such discipline, and such unwavering determination. Karath looked around at the humans around him, their faces battered and bruised but shining with triumph, and he realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary, a species that could turn weakness into strength, fear into courage, chaos into order. And he smiled, for he had learned the ultimate lesson that day, that humans were more than survivors. They were warriors in the purest sense, and he had become one of them. As night fell and the stars blanketed the sky, Karath stood with the humans around a campfire, their laughter and cheers ringing through the air. His body aching and bruised, yet his spirit soaring higher than it had ever been. He knew that the crucible had changed him forever, and that humanity was a force that no alien could underestimate ever again. And as he gazed into the flames, he whispered quietly to himself that he had not just completed the Marine Bootcamp. He had been transformed, and humanity had claimed another warrior in its ranks. Legacy of humanity. The night was calm, but the air still vibrated with the echoes of triumph. Karath and the humans gathered on the highest hill overlooking the sprawling training grounds. Their bodies tired, their minds sharp, their spirits unbroken, and the stars above reflected the fire in their hearts, for Karath had learned what no alien academy could teach him, that humanity thrived not on power alone, but on ingenuity, courage, and an unyielding will to rise against impossible odds. He watched the humans laugh and share stories of battles fought and challenges overcome, and in that laughter he felt the essence of their strength, a relentless spirit that could turn fear into determination, chaos into opportunity, and weakness into victory. Instructors approached silently, their expressions unreadable, yet their eyes betrayed astonishment, for never had a species completed the crucible with such precision and cohesion. Never had they seen strength tempered by compassion and intellect, working as a single force. Karath stood among the humans, feeling a bond that went beyond camaraderie. It was respect. It was understanding. It was the recognition that they had taught him something profound, and in return, he had given them something equally valuable, the lesson that even the mightiest warrior could learn: humility, adaptability, and the power of unity. As dawn approached, painting the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, Karath felt a shift within himself, a transformation that went deeper than physical prowess or combat skill. It was a connection to the human essence, a recognition that survival was only the first step, that true greatness lay in protecting, inspiring, and leading others, and he knew that he could never returned to being a solitary warrior that he had been sent to Bootcamp as the strongest of his species. But he would leave as one of humanity, a title earned through sweat blood and unwavering perseverance. The humans gathered around him, their faces, streaked with dirt and sweat yet glowing with pride and admiration. They did not see him as an alien. They saw him as an equal, a comrade, a symbol of what could be achieved when differences were embraced and strengths combined. Karath felt a surge of emotion, a complex mixture of gratitude, awe, and exhilaration, and he realized that this was more than training, more than a test. It was a rite of passage, a forging of souls, a testament to the indomitable human spirit that would echo through time and across galaxies, that would inspire those who doubted and challenge those who underestimated. As they descended the hill together, Karath walked among them, silently observing the quiet determination in their eyes, the subtle nods of encouragement, the unspoken promises to protect one another, and he understood that humanity was not just a species, it was a force, a movement, a beacon of resilience that could overcome the harshest worlds, the deadliest foes, and the most impossible trials. And he felt a surge of pride unlike anything he had known, for he had been transformed, not by his own strength, but by the collective power of those who refused to surrender. And he knew that wherever his path led next, he would carry the spirit of humanity with him forever. And in that moment, as the sun broke the horizon, lighting the world in brilliance, Karath raised his hand in silent salute to the humans who had taught him to be more than a warrior. And the humans responded with cheers and laughter, and a sense of unity that transcended species and boundaries. And it was clear that the legacy of this trial would not be forgotten, that it would live on in stories told in hushed tones, and in battle cries that resonated across planets, and that every alien who underestimated humanity would learn the hard lesson that they were not just survivors, but apex predators, cunning, adaptable, fearless, and unstoppable. The end.